Okay, excellent. Well, hello, everybody. It being 6:02 on Thursday, September 15th, 2022. Let's begin the meeting of the Committee on Community Planning. All votes will be by roll call. And if you'd like to speak, I'm excited to see everybody listed as attendees and as well as my colleagues here as panelists. If you'd like to speak, please choose the raise hand function and we will call on you and hear what you have to say or hear what your questions are. Clerk Semino, can we please have a roll call to begin the meeting?
Councillor Maglio.
Here.
Councillor O'Brien.
Present.
Councillor Reynolds will hopefully join us soon. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I think the first order of business, this being a Zoom meeting and a remote meeting, we're going to jump right into the items on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes from December 19th, 2017. And just for people who are listening, Robert's Rules of Order does address the fact that we can approve minutes from a meeting. A member's absence from the meeting for which minutes are being approved does not prevent a member from participating or their correction or approval. It's basically saying, yes, we agree this meeting happened. Yes, we agree those were their minutes. So is there a motion to approve the minutes of December 19th, 2017?
I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes of December 19th, 2017.
Excellent. Can I second it?
You'll have to step down as chair, but I would like you to, and I would like to open for discussion, but that's not my place. It's yours, so please.
Okay, well, I'm going to do both. Let me step down as chair and let me open it for discussion.
Yeah, you can make a well, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'll help you.
You can tell me.
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead and make a second and then say it's open for discussion.
Excellent. Okay, second.
Thank you very much. I thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to just make a brief dialogue here. What I would like to ask the chair to do is ask if we can have the council clerk go contact the administration to find out if in fact item 09417, which is council president housing production plan or take up any action relative thereto, if the council president at that time took any action regarding the housing production plan. Because from what I can see in the meeting minutes, there was discussion, there was review, but then there was subject to further review and discussion with stakeholders. And I'm wondering if anything proceeded after that. Then we can go ahead and approve the minutes. But I just think that it'd be good, Madam Chair, if we could find out if there's been any continuing action on that prior to this meeting.
Okay, so is that something that we could just ask you to do, Clerk Semino?
Yes, I can do that. I'll do some investigating.
Thank you.
Great, great. Okay, so
I'll step back up as
is there
chair.
any, yes, so if there's not any other discussion, I will step back up as chair and ask for a roll call vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So Councillor Maglio.
Yes,
To approve minutes.
I approve. Yes.
Councillor O'Brien.
Aye, with subject to the commentary.
And Councillor Reynolds is presently not here.
Okay. Thank you. So moving on. Tonight's committee meeting, as stated, is the first in quite a few years. We have 3 items that were referred to the under new business for discussion this evening. And as chairwoman, I will be allowing public comment at this meeting. If you'd like to speak when it's time, please use the raise hand function. And I thought what we could do to just get the discussion going is to, especially for people who may not have these papers in front of them, is to kind of review a little bit of what the items are that we're talking about. And to start with the description of the committee. I just as a bit of a baseline for all of us, the committee description is that the Community Planning Committee may consider and report upon all matters relating to short-term planning and community renewal projects, as well as long-term community planning and visioning and issues of sustainability and the environment. So there's a lot there that is fairly vague and broad, and yet has really very specific implications, I think, on us as a community, as a town. So if we want to just jump into this first item, because this seems to be, it's certainly related to what you had mentioned, the 094-17 from 2017. And it's kind of the same. It's the same item number. It's just 04122, multifamily zoning requirements for MBTA communities or take up any action relative thereto. So as part of this conversation, we know that there's an economic development bill that passed in 2021. There are new zoning requirements for housing that are connected to specific grant opportunities with the state. And this is aimed specifically, this particular item is aimed specifically at communities that host public transit. And this is an area that requires extensive community planning in order for Braintree to figure out how we can understand this, discuss this, make some suggestions, do some research, figure out who to talk to, who to bring in. And I think that's kind of the beauty of this first meeting, is that we can discuss these things and come up with a checklist of what we would like to see brought to the table at a future meeting, so that we're able to actually have some really good substantive discussions. It's part of the agenda that went out. On the third page, I had attached just some various links for people to get some information, get some background. I had done it for all three areas, but we might as well just start talking about this first area. And I also just want to say, welcome, Councillor Reynolds. Glad to have you here as well.
My apologies for being late.
It's okay. So can I, is there someone who would like to jump in and kind of kick us off with this discussion? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you. So could I ask a high-level question before I go into my lineup here? And that is, has anyone from the administration been invited to this meeting?
For tonight's meeting, no. This is kind of our first starting out, get assembled, let me make my mistakes now at the first meeting.
Don't sweat the details on that, because we all do. So let me start out by saying this is not similar to the 2017 item.
Okay.
Because, yeah, I'm sorry. And I'm not, well, let me just go ahead and say it. So the reason I say that, because, well, at least from what I can tell, and I'm going to kind of go backwards and then I'll go forwards, right? So what you're addressing here is part of an economic development bill passed in 2021, because the governor has progressed on his desire for housing development across all 351 communities, not just Braintree. However, what was presented back in 17 is a housing production plan. Now, I had brought the housing production plan requirement to the previous administration, even prior to that, because it is actually state law that we're supposed to have a housing production plan. And at the time, it went into the planning department, and like things, that word was many, it didn't go anywhere because we never received a housing production plan. And then I believe that there was some angst about that, and therefore the chairman at the time, Councilor Owens, put together the Community Planning Committee for things such as this. And as you can see, from 2017 until today, although I did ask to have an update, but I'm going to guess that we don't have an update, that I would argue we still don't have a housing production plan. And so now here we are, fast forwarding to 2021, but 2021 being the economic development bill that you talked about, but let's go back to an email that Councilor O'Brien sent, which you don't have, by the way, because I didn't include it because I kind of wasn't sure where this was going to go, and I had a feeling that nobody was going to be invited, which is what the case is, but that's why I asked in advance. But back in 2022, January 28, 2022, I became aware of an MBTA community information requirement that basically said, and I'm going to read the email because this is going to be public record, and it was requesting to place on the town council agenda under the category of communications for a town-wide briefing to overall strategy to comply with requirements of housing, and particularly MBTA communities and multifamily zoning requirements. So I referenced an email that we received on January 5th, 2022, titled KP Law PCE Update DCHD Housing Choice Regulations Update. And it required that the communities, MBTA communities, must A, submit the MBTA community information form by 5 o'clock on May 2, 2022. Don't know if that happened, that it didn't. And then the other thing was to hold a briefing of your city council, town council, or select board on the draft compliance guidance no later than May 2, 2022, and attest to that on the MBTA community information form. That form went to our required contact, which of course is our council clerk. Thank you very much. And what I received basically was that my submission was late, but that they, being the planning board or the planning department at the time, I'm sorry, not board, the department, would work on it and give us an update. That was the last I heard. So fast forwarding now, it's even changed more, I think, or maybe it hasn't, but we're still waiting for the administration to take some action on a January 28th request.
So what I can tell you about that is, and I hear some dog issues happening behind me, sorry. What I can tell you is that the director of the planning department did make a presentation, and it was at a public recorded town council meeting.
Okay, so I'm wrong.
And I'm looking through my dates here to just try and figure it out. I'm guessing it was around March or April.
Maybe it went away over my head.
MBTA, yeah. So it was April 26th. So, and the deadline is December 2022. And what she talked about were some of the guidelines as they were able to understand. And those are also one of the links that I included when I sent out these materials were sort of the state of how things, the latest briefing from DHCD regarding this MBTA communities. But it's not like it was a plan that was presented. It was more some foundational information about what kind of numbers we're looking at or towns are looking at, what kind of, what is, something, qualifying factors, how many units would be required. So she kind of gave us a general presentation, and that is the last that I know of it. Yes.
Good that you remember that. Thank you very much. I clearly zoned out on that. And I just don't only assume and hope that we fulfilled the May 2, 2022 requirement. But at the same time, I know that some things get done in a timely manner, and some things get deferred. So that's good. And I think that this is a very healthy conversation, particularly because we are an MBTA community. And we also are penalized by the MBTA because we have to pay a fee that other communities around us don't. I never understood that, but yeah, I'm all game for bringing this forward in future conversations.
Okay, so I'd like to, if I can make a comment, Madam Chairman?
Please do, and I'm just going to shut my door while you do.
Okay, well, I want to thank Councilor O'Brien. I think he summed it up rather well, where we are. And I share his concern as far as are we in compliance? I did have an opportunity to attend a Zoom call that was held by the Department of Economic Development and Housing, Community Housing, last week. I believe it was last Wednesday. And what they did is they presented the MBTA communities and transit-oriented development zoning final rules, which were published. And they made a number of changes or tweaks that were based on some of the initial feedback that communities had provided. And there are various categories that a community would fall into. And Braintree falls into what we call a rapid transit community. And that community has the largest, I should say, has the heaviest lift, if you will, of requirements to meet as part of the zoning aspect of what is being asked for by the state. Now, one of the things that I had heard initially when this came out is that there were folks who felt that the state was telling communities what to do. And in one way, I can understand how somebody could say that or could come to that type of a conclusion, or what's their initial reaction. The more and more I've read about this topic, and the more that I have gotten involved with it, it's my now understanding is that what we have is a statewide and particularly a very specific regional problem, and that we're a part of a region that has a significant economic impacts due to the fact that we have housing that is inadequate. We have not kept up with the pace of our population. We have not kept up with the demands of what our local economy really requires in order for it to work with the fundamentals of a good economy. Businesses are impacted, et cetera. And I won't go into all of those things, and we'll have other times to talk about that, I'm certain, for us to make those presentations. And quite frankly, it's my understanding that we are not being required to build the housing. We are only required to designate the zoning for the purposes of being able to create housing. Some statistics that were just truly mind-boggling is over the last 50 years. And I'm sorry that I don't have the exact numbers, but I will provide those at a later conversation on this topic. Over the last 50 years, something like 75% of the total house we built in the last 25 years was built 25 years ago. And remaining 25% has been built in the last 25 years. And it's still not enough to keep up with the population growth. So there is, and why I'm saying this is that just to kind of ascertain the assessment of what the situation that we have right here that we're all facing is that growth has lifted this region from an economic standpoint, but it is now that growth is beginning to collapse in on itself because we don't have the proper amount of an inventory of housing. We're not talking about creating subsidized housing. We're talking about just workforce housing, people who are contributing to our economies. And from my particular point of view, having had a history of working on the planning board for 13 years and then working in the mayor's office for 3 years and now doing this, attending numerous types of conferences and forums, trying to identify what are we going to do to fix this problem, because I attended a Mass Bio conference 2 years ago, and the topic of the discussion was what concerns the folks who are working in that industry the most about working in the life science industry here in the Boston area. The number one requirement, the number one complaint was the cost of housing. The number 2 complaint was transportation. And we all, I'm sure, can identify with the transportation problems and the traffic issues that we face in this area. And what does that do? It's jeopardizing it to a point where the Mass Bio now is very concerned about the fact that we, as the number 1 life science region in the country, and pretty much probably in the world in some manners, that we're jeopardizing that opportunity. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? And so this is the state coming and saying, let's work together and partner on this. So that's the way I take it, is that they're asking us to partner. They're asking us to take a very genuine look at what we can do to help with the housing, that will help sustain the foundation of our growing economy in this region. We in Braintree are in a kind of a unique situation. We have opportunity to build housing and multi-unit housing in areas that won't impact our individual neighborhoods, that will not impact our streets, because we have them around a very significant transit center. We're talking about a master plan. Now, I had very big concerns about our master plan being undermined by a vote recently in that area that brought a business that could potentially impede. I'm not going to go on that rabbit hole right now, and that's tied into zoning. But the master plan, how do we build what we need? How do we sustain what we need? And this housing is a really important part of what we need to sustain Braintree's economic strength, or at least regain our economic strength. Because quite frankly, we look at our budgets over the last 3 years, they're going down, they're going down, they're going down. Our revenues are going down, our expenses are going up. And what are we doing? We're cutting budgets, we're cutting services. We're not doing anything to invest into our community. And housing, from my perspective, in the area of the Ivy Street corridor, for example, this transit area, we have a terrific opportunity to keep cars off the road, to blend it in with our character of our community. But we have time as well. So to Councillor O'Brien's point, I am very concerned that there is crickets coming out of the mayor's office on housing, on an economic plan. Nothing. They're doing nothing at all. And here we are, the council once again having to rattle the cage to get some attention, to try to get some answers, to have a dialogue, just a dialogue. That's all I'm asking for, is a dialogue. And Councilor O'Brien hit it right on the head, that he had to keep asking to get this information and hoping that, well, if we don't do anything, we keep quiet, maybe we'll go away. We're not going to go away. And now the state is also saying, look, this is a regional problem. We need the help of the communities. And we're going to incentivize you as a community to help with this regional problem. We're not doing anything. And there's more than one way to solve this problem. We're being offered it on our terms to be able to solve this problem. So it's very disconcerting to me. And I share the concerns of the councilors here and others and many residents that doing nothing is not a solution. So I think one of the things, Madam Chairman, that we should look at is that, and I'd be willing to work with you on this, is to post what those notable changes were that were made as a result of the pushback from the public, from communities, from other elected officials. When the initial MBTA communities TOD zoning came rolling out, they heard it, they changed it, they tweaked it. Right now, we have until January 31st for a rapid transit community. We need to be in 95% compliance, which means we need an action plan due to the state of what's our ideas, what are some of the things that we're thinking that we can do to zone. We don't have to build, we just have to zone. And that's responsible planning. That's what it is. It's called planning for a reason. Sitting on our hands, doing nothing, waiting for someone else to come up with a solution for us is not leadership, and it's not planning. So I didn't mean to go on this down this path here, but this is a really important issue. And I think I'm very, very happy that this committee has stood up, This committee is now meeting. There is many, many topics that we can talk about, that we can force a conversation on, force some kind of dialogue. So with that, I'll stand down and give the floor back to you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Reynolds. So as we then think about how to move this forward and how to partner with the mayor's office and how to see some planning take place, it seems like we have a couple of options. Do we want to assemble some panelists to come and speak before our committee? We could, we could talk to somebody from CHAPA or DHCD to look at some of the timelines. We could hear from the director of planning again in terms of getting her most recent input on what some of those changes are and what the next step is in terms of deadlines. We could also bring in some other communities who are working on this and what some of the pros and cons. I mean, we definitely have to do our own research on this, but it's also would be good to talk to other, cities and towns are having to grapple with this, and why not build some bridges as we make our way through?
I agree with you.
Yeah, I could I just make one comment? I looked at the April, let me get the right date so I don't screw up, the April 26th town council agenda, and yes, it was listed as MBTA communities under the president. And so that's probably why it went over my head and below my shoulders. But I also noticed in the documentation that the presentation that may have been provided and that I may have zoomed out on was not in the documentation. So at a minimum, I'd like to get that presentation again, even paper. I don't need her to come on and do it. But then I agree on the other items, yes.
Okay, so, and the other thing is keeping in mind when you do get that presentation to know that there have even been updates since that time. Yes.
Okay, yes, thank you. And I do recognize that, but I also want to make sure that we do have one minor understanding. Well, I think it's pretty major, but the entire landing area, we're going to call it Braintree Landing, has been rezoned to allow for MBTA community development. I know there's a term for it, but so it has been rezoned. There was a large swath of area that was rezoned. And I have to admit, and let me just say, if you are, I know at least one of us is familiar with the area, but if you look to the left of the, as you're heading towards the new development there is a nursing home, as we probably all know. And if you look to the right of the nursing homes is a church, but to the right of the church, there's a fairly decent amount of land there. And I have to say that I am shocked, not being a developer or someone who, has the wherewithal, but I am shocked someone hasn't come through to redevelop that area to, in fact, increase the housing. So, and by the way, I'm not a fan. Let me just get that out there. If you've paid any attention to Councilor O'Brien is not a fan of, let's call it, overdevelopment. He's not even a fan of medium development, let alone overdevelopment. I'm a lot looking for it. And in fact, I may not have even approved the zoning for that, but it is what it is. And I'm to me, it's like, okay, maybe I was a no vote, but if it got a yes vote, I have to accept it because it got a yes vote. And I think a previous counselor mentioned something that recently went down that the two of us believe should not have gone down, but it did. I have no choice to change it. So, whether I like it or not, as a citizen, I don't. But as a counselor, I have to accept it because it's now law, so to speak. So anyway, there is that land, and I'm shocked that nobody's come forward. That said, and I know that the former planning, I think he was a vice chair, but he may have been a chair at some point. I think he knows this. And we had an offline discussion about this with the chair, member Reynolds, before you came on.
Yep.
We don't have a control over that. So if someone comes to my patch, for example, and says, well, they won't say it to me, and decides that they want to put a massive development in, they don't come to this guy. They go to one person, and he's the mayor. So we don't have insight. For all I know, somebody could already be planning on doing something in there, in that patch that I'm talking about, which, by the way, isn't barren. There's housing on there now. People own these houses, but what could be there is different from what exists today, I guess is what I'm saying. So what I'm saying in a way is I don't want to undercut the executive branch, because there has been some initiatives around at least one MBTA station. In this case here, it's the commuter rail. So there have been some initiatives. There is opportunity, and we know that there's a 40B development going on in Councilor Maglio's patch that is a 40B that very few people know is a 40B, because nobody really pays attention to East Braintree. Thank you very much. But it's a 40B, and nobody's complaining about it because it's a betterment of what exists. But it also is exceeding what could be planned there or could be developed there. And I don't think anybody is unwelcome of that. Plus, there's also requirements for betterments along the waterway, which we're all going to benefit from. So I think probably that's why it's not getting as much 40B noise as another 40B that's being presented. That said, again, I'm sorry to go off on a diatribe, but I think it's all healthy discussion. And I think we need administration to further that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any public comments? I do see a hand up, actually.
That would be me.
Oh.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So I would agree again with Councilor O'Brien that I think the main point that he had to say was at least have a dialogue. And that's the example that he seemed to have cited on the previous vote of the council this summer on an unrelated issue. It was a healthy dialogue. And there was good hearings. There were hearings on it. And that's what we need in this particular case. There has to be an acknowledgement that doing nothing is not a solution, that this has risen to a level where our economy really is at risk. I don't mean to sound like an alarmist, but when you fail to take care of business, business will fail. When you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And a conversation doesn't cost anything. Now, to your point, Madam Chair, there is assistance that is available on this topic from the state. They call it 3A TA, technical assistance. And more specific assistance by organization is that you've got the Mass Housing Partnership, MHP. You've got representatives also from DH, Department of Housing and Community Development. You've got EEA, the actual term escapes me, but it's land use planning grants, et cetera. Executive of Energy, maybe. And then, of course, there's MAPC. They're all available to provide technical assistance and clarification on the scope of the law, the minimum requirements of the law that will keep a community in compliance and eligible for various state smart roads, or I think is the name of the program, and other types of community development grant money from the state. And it doesn't have to be done overnight. It doesn't have to be a rush job, pardon me. So I'm very, very open to having those subject matter experts come in, provide us with a little bit more clarity, give us, all of us on this panel, as well as residents, an opportunity to ask questions, at forum for that opportunity to ask questions and to obtain a deeper understanding of what does this all really mean. So thank you, Madam President.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Reynolds. I agree. And I think that being able to get reliable valid information, to be able to ask questions, to get the pros as well as the cons. I think that's important for us to really be able to even build some kind of a movement forward on this. So then I would ask you, do we, is this something that in terms of the work of the committee, do we each want to go out and, you know, sort of take an agency and see who we can get from that agency to come and speak at a next meeting? Is this something that we would all do this through me? Like how would we, I'm looking for the surest way for us to have some experts here at our next meeting. Councilor O'Brien.
I guess I'm a little concerned about going out and bringing in quote unquote experts until we've heard from the administration. Because what we don't know, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe that mass community, Mbta communities that went over my head, maybe it did provide us more information than I thought it did, because I mean, I looked at that agenda was pretty busy. And so I can understand only personally why that one may have gone over my head. Plus it didn't have my name listed with the item. But I just don't know what the administration has done. Perhaps, and I understand from the previous speaker that there are assistants, NC that will assist in various departments, but we don't know whether or not the planning department has already engaged those people.
Right. Well, I definitely agree. And I think that's kind of our first step,
Right.
I think, is to reach out to the planning department.
Exactly. Let's find out where there's, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject, but I am, and I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But yeah, let's get that first before we bring that cart, and let's put the cart back. But all good stuff. I'm not like trying to delay things. I'm not saying none of this is good. Yes, all good stuff. But I think we need to give them an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to use the word, but I will, because I don't know what other word fits here, but to defend any actions or inaction.
So would it be possible then, because I think what I'm thinking about is the fact that there's a month between meetings and January, it's going to be January before we know it, and there are deadlines. I'm wondering, would it be possible for us to set a meeting 2 weeks from now? So that another meeting 4 weeks from now could be where we kind of digest what we heard at the 2-week meeting, and then line up some, if the director of the planning department is already working with people from the state, then that's fantastic, because we would look at how to support that and how to then, build this. If there hasn't been any steps taken, then we'll need to take the step, right?
Right. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I should raise my hand. Thank you. I know it's a formal thing and you have to be formal. I don't know if accessing or contacting these folks to get their assistance for the council is the right thing. Now, getting someone to present what the previous member talked about, that's a no-brainer. I guarantee you can get 5 people lined up to talk to us. But if they've already talked, and I know this is logical, but I'm going to say it anyway, but to talk to someone or bring someone in that's already spoken to the planning department and they're already, taking some action, because I recognize planning is busy, especially in the summertime, right? Because a lot of building in spring and summer. So, so I guess I'm probably saying yes to all of the above, but yeah, I think, and I was thinking, and I was going to say, even a weekly wouldn't be bad, but I'm not sure that a weekly for the planning department is good, right? So we want to make sure that the people that do come to us are properly prepared. But if we do a 2-week out and say this, because in later sessions, I think we're going to be bringing in other components of the planning department, or at least I think it makes sense. This, and this, and then we can get them prepared, and then we can go, maybe after that, we can have a week meeting.
Okay. I think it all sounds good. It's all possible. Yes, Councilor Reynolds.
I would agree with that approach. I think that is probably the most prudent, is to invite the planning director for an update on the town's compliance efforts on this particular topic, and also ask to provide us a stake in the ground update. Where are we as far as our ability. Now, we may be making assumptions here as well. We don't know from the mayor's office what is the mayor's stance on this, because from my perspective, this mayor has communicated in numerous ways that he does not think multi-unit housing is right for Braintree. That is just my own opinion. That's just my own opinion I'm stating there. I would like to hear that directly from the mayor's office. There has been no articulated policy on housing in our community, nor on any kind of economic plan. So I think Councilor O'Brien's to invite the planning director in to give us a definitive word. Where do we stand as a community? What is the executive office's ideas on this? We as a council certainly are going on the record of what we feel is what's important for our community to move it ahead and what's the best interest of our community. But I definitely think that's the right place to start. Is our next meeting is to have that planning director come in, give us that update. What is, at least give us some kind of articulation. What is the policy? What is, how does this administration plan to respond and proceed, if at all?
Okay, Councilor O'Brien.
In fairness, a texter that is an actual attendee provided me the name that I was looking for when I was discussing the new zoning in the landing. And it's called transit-oriented development. I keep forgetting that. But I don't think there's any incentive for the town even to perform transit-oriented development. And so that could be an area of discussion to find out if there is, because I know in your information here relative to the council order, it does talk about grant opportunities. And so we might actually end up veering off into the grant area, right? Which is another component of the town. And because we do have a person that specializes in grants. So, you know, there may be some information there, but generally I believe, and I don't know this because I don't manage the executive branch, but generally I believe that the grant person, or let's call them organization for lack of saying one person or many, I think when they see a grant that they let the administration know, and then they contact planning and things proceed from there. But, you know, I guess my point is, like, there could be some inaction by developers to actually do, probably not the right word, but I'm going to use that, do transit-oriented development in that patch that I talked about. And I recall in previous conversations, it could be because we have height limitations. Now, I don't know if that zoning does away with the height limitations, because the height limitations were of concern to the zoning, I mean, to the development that occurred in the landing, but they acquiesced, and I think they did a fantastic job, unlike the other side of the landing. But you know, that could be a pain point for some developers that we don't know, because again, back to my previous point, we don't have insight because we're not the executive branch, and they don't come to us. I'll stand down.
So I think all of that makes perfect sense. I mean, this committee is about getting as much information as we can get. Tonight's meeting is about a starting point. One thing I will share from the presentation we had back in April was that, that it was factual in terms of at that time what was being required. I did not get a sense at that time as to whether there was a decision that was made as to whether this would be feasible or not for Braintree. So I think that in terms of understanding that, like, we need to understand that for ourselves, in addition to along with what the mayor's office has decided. because I think that we are a bit of we can play this role of conduit in terms of letting people know what this plan is about. We can provide that information, we can get input and feedback, and hopefully just be another channel for which people can have knowledge and a say over how their town moves forward and meets the needs of its residents. So
Agreed.
All good.
great. Okay.
May I just one more comment,
Mhm.
Madam President, excuse me, Madam Chair. I've promoted you twice already on this phone call.
I'll take it.
Council O'Brien raises another concern, legitimate concern voiced by some residents about size, about density. And maybe I just take that a little bit beyond about maybe what some of those concerns are. And he's right. And those issues were addressed in the most recent DHCD final zoning rules for MBTA communities. And what they have done is they have baked in or they have accounted for changes to reasonable size criteria. They have created safety valves, if you will, or circuit breakers is a term that they use, that no more than 25% increase of existing housing stock across the community is being asked for here. And that how local zoning rules are to be adhered to, So they're not taking away, and this is very important to me, the ability of our community to set its own standards, its own rules, if you will, to plan on its own terms, which Braintree obviously has a deep desire to do. If anything, we want it on our terms, but we have to have the conversation. And unfortunately, that we haven't had it, but this forum, and thank you again, Madam Chair, is giving us that opportunity. And I want to really engage more on this so that there is data is available through the master plan. There is a plethora of housing data, economic data that paints a picture. There's plenty of commuting data that paints a picture that if someone truly reads it, you'll see that doing nothing is not an option for us at this particular point. And I don't want to be construed as all you want to do is turn Braintree into Quincy, turn Braintree into a city. No, the character of Braintree is paramount to me. I love this community. However, I don't live like an ostrich and put my head in the sand if there's something I don't like and just hopes it goes away. I understand that we have to actively and proactively manage issues. That's the nature of what we do on this council and what leadership basic principle is. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Reynolds and Councilor O'Brien. I also see that there is a hand raised, and I am going to click on and bring you on, Steve S. If you would like to turn your microphone on, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's Steve Shasha. Hello, all.
Hello.
So, I first of all, let me say I greatly appreciate you having this meeting, and I couldn't agree more on the tenor of the meeting, in that Braintree has for decades really lacked any sort of planning. The landing district was done, but it wasn't done with a full plan, right? And we're seeing the repercussions of that in terms of parking and some other things. So, one thing that I would encourage this committee to look at is to go through this document in more detail yourselves, because I think that what DHCD is putting out there about what this does and does not do is very misleading. And to follow up on what Councilor Reynolds said, these rules would not require any more than a 25% increase in total housing units to zone for that, right? And if you look at Appendix 1 of the DHCD compliance guidelines, you will see that for Braintree, that is 3,769 new housing units. Those have to be allowed for in a 50-acre area. So while they keep saying no more than 15 units per acre would be necessary, if you do that math, 3,769 units in 50 acres, that is 75.4 units per acre. That is an unprecedented level of density for Braintree. To put that in some context, the Holland 40B in Braintree Square is 36 units per acre. It's a 4-story building, 1 level of parking, 3 levels of residential. And keep in mind, this is a building where they have crammed as many units as they can into their parcel. They have no fire access. They have variances for open space and parking in order to cram as many units in there as they can. If you modified that plan to 75 units per acre instead of 36, you would be looking at a 9-story building. If you assumed 1.5 parking spaces per residence instead of 1, you'd be looking at a 10-story building. And we're talking about doing this across 50 acres of Braintree. So that would be 25 Hollands projects times 2.5. The density that they're asking for here is, it's remarkable that they would even suggest it. And as far as doing things Braintree's way, well, as Councilor O'Brien pointed out, we have some transit-oriented development, Landing 53 in the Landing, right? But one of the things that we had to fight for there was to get ground floor commercial. The builder did not want to do it. We ended up having to do tax breaks and offer a lot of incentives to get them to do that. These rules prohibit the town from requiring any commercial. So in an area like Braintree Weymouth Landing, you would actually be telling developers you can build 9 or 10-story buildings and no commercial is required. Think about what that would do to the Landing if all the businesses disappeared. I think if you really read through this document carefully, there is a lot to be concerned about. And maybe before you bring people in, just go through this and see if I'd be surprised if you really read this in detail that anybody is really gonna want to do this anyway. And also, one thing you could ask though is the MassWorks and the other grants that are listed. I looked through the history of what's available online at the state level, and I don't see any record of Braintree ever having received any of these grants in the past. Mm-hmm. So it's not clear to me that we're even giving up anything by not complying with these rules. So as you go forward, I really hope you will dig deep into this, because there's a lot to be concerned about in this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate your comments. And I think that's why it's important to have public forums and for people to be able to weigh in. And so thank you very much. One thing I do want to say, though, is with regard to the last point about the grants, what that was made in terms of the units per acre, that was just discussed and presented back in April, and it has been updated. But in terms of the grants that we would be able to apply for, I think part of what's interesting about that is, yeah, we've never gotten any of those grants. We have not gotten money to repair the infrastructure on Allen Street. We have not, like, we are not getting that kind of funding. And the idea, one of the incentives is that we would then be entitled to, we would have more of an option at getting those kinds of grants. Now, whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But it just occurred to me and I wanted to throw that out there. Okay, anybody else? Yes. No. Yeah, there she is. Okay. Liz. Liz Page, you're on.
Hi, thank you very much for taking my question. I appreciate that, Madam Chairperson. And so I have read at least somewhat the latest update from the state. And I have some questions, but I do want to go back before I even start with my questions. I would like to just make a comment that somebody said, I believe it was Councilor Reynolds, that it would give us the ability to blend with the character of the town. And based on what I have read in these zoning guidelines, basically the town relinquishes all control when we sign on to this, and the developer does it as of right. So we would have no input on what the character or the style of these buildings would be. So my first question is, what particular area are we talking about in this? Because from what I have seen in the writings from the state, they basically draw a half-mile radius around the Braintree T station. And so my question is, when you rezone this, you would be rezoning all these residents' property, which is their single biggest, most important investment that they will probably make in their lifetime, their home, their house. And so everyone that lives within a half-mile radius, as the crow flies from this T station, will have their zoning changed to comply with this. And when you do that, you no longer make housing more affordable for the average resident to buy a home. What you do is a home goes up for sale, and then what you will see is a builder will outbid a resident or just a regular person, and then the builder buys that house and will throw a big apartment on a small lot, a large multifamily unit, and you have forever changed the character of this neighborhood where people have owned their homes. There might be a couple of two-family homes in that area, but the entire area from the T station basically to Franklin Street will be impacted by this dramatically. And my question is, have you notified all of these people in writing that their zoning is possibly going to be changed? Because I think that they should be part of this conversation from the very beginning. And then in addition to that area, there will possibly also be another area in town that will be considered for this same type of zoning. And I'm wondering, what is the other area that you folks are discussing to be considered for the other area outside of the T station?
Thank you,
Okay.
Liz. Thanks.
Thank
So
you.
if I could give two quick answers, and then I'll definitely go over to you, Councilor Reynolds. But in terms of letters that have gone out, areas that have been considered, this is so preliminary that if anyone has an answer to that, it would be their own answer, because really as a committee, this is even our first opportunity to meet together with residents as a committee of the council to even talk about what we learned back in April and what has changed since then. So I would say that those are good questions and I've written them down, and I specifically, me personally, do not have those answers, but absolutely agree that there are questions that need to be asked and answered. So
Okay, and am I still on there?
you are still, yes.
Okay, so as it's written by the state, it does encompass a half-mile radius from the T station. So you can have a map and it's as the crow
Mhm.
flies, it would have a huge impact on many residential neighborhoods in Braintree.
Absolutely.
And I think that that is, you're really in a very, you would have a huge impact on many, many residents in town and their largest investment ever. So I don't think that we are putting our heads in the sand when we say that we want our residential neighborhoods to be protected and preserved. And I think that it's not right. Braintree residents made it clear that they do not want big, tall buildings. They don't want to be like Quincy. If they did, they would move to Quincy. It's nothing against Quincy. It's just different than the way Braintree wants to be. And I think that the residents need to be notified from the get-go that these conversations are going on, because right now we know that certain area adjacent to the T station and into the rest of the center of town will be impacted dramatically. So I would like to suggest that notification is sent out to that entire half-mile radius before your next meeting.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Councilor Reynolds.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So, it's not surprising to hear some of these same answers that we're getting from the same individuals. And I thank them for being here. I'm thankful that they're here part of this conversation, because it's important that we have this conversation in public and that facts are actually adhered to. So first of all, the requirements of this program does not compel a community to build this housing in this area. Again, I'll go back to the term of planning. So when I said you put your head in the sand, it's like there's a problem and I'm not gonna deal with it. What we're talking about here is creating an environment where reasonable people can talk through what the future holds for us. We're not looking backwards into the 1970s. We're not looking backwards into the 1950s. Time waits for no one. The Boston area has grown tremendously in just the last 20 years. And it's not because of Braintree. It's because of the region. And this is a regional issue. And we are a part of this region. We're not giving up our autonomy as a town. We're not giving up our autonomy as us of planning how we want Braintree to be. But it's irresponsible on our part to do nothing. Now, one of the things is that there is not a requirement in any of these rules saying that you are required to build housing within this half-mile radius of a transportation center, such as the Braintree T station. It talks about zoning. And now when you want to talk about building as of right, that doesn't supersede the zoning laws of the community. Because if a builder had to build, if a builder could just go ahead and build as right, there's no need for a planning board. There's no need for a planning department. So I just want to put that in context as a counterbalance to statements here that we're giving up the farm. Okay. Also, these requirements do not, as I said, supersede our local zoning, nor do they allow for the removal of current residents and homeowners to be bought out of their existing homes. And as I stated before, We can't conflate between our single-family neighborhoods and the areas that can support multi-unit housing. We have a lack of diverse housing in this community, and this is a program that is going to allow to benefit the people of Braintree, our children who can't afford. As a case in point, I bought my home in 2006. My home has increased in value by 62% in that time frame. And I know there's a lot of other people's homes in this town the same amount. And it's great to know that we're sitting on this big amount of money. That's great. But the simple rule of supply and demand is deteriorating our local economy and the ability of people to live in this community. It's taking away the ability of our children who grew up in these neighborhoods, who want to stay in this community. It's taking away from senior citizens who have no other choice but to stay in their home because they can't afford to go anywhere else, even though that is an affordable situation for them or a challenge for them in many cases. There's no place for them to go. So I get a little tired of the extreme kind of extrapolation of what these rules actually mean when they don't mean that. They're guidelines, and it's in the context. Now, I don't mean to be attacking anybody here, and that's not my, but I do get frustrated when the facts are taken out of context to make it sound like it's an extreme situation when it is not. No one wants to build 9-story buildings in this community. Nobody does. And to use that, it's a bit of hyperbole in my case. And also, just so that you know that there is also that 1 mile, it isn't a uniform. These new rules that have been tweaked, it requires you to spread them out into what makes sense where you have available places to build. And it's a credit towards the MBTA zoning building itself. So you're not required to stay within that half a mile because that's unrealistic. That is really unrealistic to say that, well, we have to stay in that half mile, and if we don't have enough to build, and we don't have to build everything that this requires. I'm against the density. It's an abomination of the Holland project. That's stuffing 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag, and it makes a mess. It makes no sense. That's bad policy, and we're fighting it. But that's 40B because we've done nothing about it. And we're a little late to the game here. So, I want to solve these problems. I don't want 40B. I don't want 5-6-story buildings in our communities. But doing nothing and to scare people to doing nothing is not the way for us to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Reynolds. So I think that it's probably safe to say that I think that, we heard a comment tonight about all of us reading this closely, and we've all read certain parts of it, gotten our primers, participated in videos, but also I think that's why we do need to have people who are doing this all day, every day, come in and also talk to us about the what sort of options, possibilities, opportunities, or drawbacks there are. And what I'd like to do, I'd like to ask the indulgence of people if we could move on. There's 2 other items that I want to talk about tonight. I don't know that it'll have the traction of this MBTA issue, but it's also really kind of related because we're talking about planning, and we're talking about the community, and we're talking about potential building or not building. And I think when we start to look at the earth that we're doing this on, the whole issue of environmental sustainability, in terms of we are really pretty poised to gather a lot of information, just like as we're gathering it from the master planning process, from this, pursuing potentially the MBTA information. And we're looking at land, we're looking at what exists out in the community, and the whole issue of public spaces, fertilizers, pesticides, what kinds of plants get planted, what kind of maintenance happens in our public spaces and in our parks. You know, having green spaces is also part of how we don't completely overload our community with just buildings. It's to maintain green, it's to have healthy air, it's to we want to look at our green spaces and look at parks and look at how parks are being used and if they're being used and where they are. And you know, it gets into some kind of quality of life issues around these public spaces and these green spaces. So I'm wondering if we can kind of move from a strictly MBTA housing development focus into talk about the second item, which is the environmental sustainability piece. And if there's any comments that councilors would like to make. And I'm getting a message, and yes, Sue, that is totally fine. Is it about the previous issue or is it about the sustainability piece? Do you know?
I believe it's a previous issue.
Okay, so we're going to have one more comment on the previous issue, and we'll move
Okay.
into the environmental sustainability. And then while you're getting her on, if I could just jump then to the last issue as well. Again, it's getting late, but I want to make sure we don't give short shrift to these other really important issues. So, you know, the place that we live and the place that we want to walk down the street and breathe healthy air is also a place where we want to be able to move through. We want to be able to move through it by foot, by car, by bike, by wheelchair, however it is that we're moving through. And I think that's another area that has not really been given a lot of attention in terms of the growing number of the growing traffic congestion, the near misses that we hear about and see and get footage of all the time from people who are trying to cycle to the MBTA, cycle to the train station, cycle to the bus stop. There's very little safety in these areas. And how we can, as a community, plan to make our streets, to make everything safer for people. And this could be done as part of a good community plan, with where people live is where they want to walk, is where they go to and from. And they want to not get, you know, blown up by a compressor station or be, you know, breathing in toxins in their air. They want to just live a life. So
little tiny bit, yeah.
Related.
Not as bad though.
Did you have a comment, Councilor Reynolds, or is that up from last time?
I'm sorry. No, I don't have a comment.
Okay,
That
so
must be up from last time.
Okay.
Lower hand. So.
All right. So I will throw this out to the councilors, but I know that Clerk Semino was getting a caller on the line.
Okay, I'm going to put her on speaker.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jill.
Hi, thank you, Chairwoman Maglio,
Okay.
for having this meeting, first of all.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. I actually prepared something for tonight for the first item, 04122. But I'm now realizing that the members of this board are not up to speed on what the MBTA program is. So I won't go into that. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for bringing this out to the public and for having a meeting on community planning for the first time in almost 4 years. I will say that after looking at this MBTA requirement, I disagree with a prior speaker who is saying that the zoning that was provided or quoted is incorrect. will not go on with what I have at this point because it would be nothing more than another reason for someone to get aggressive, if you will. But I just wanted to let you know that I wanted to thank you for this, and I will be putting together, or I've already put together, a cost effectiveness type program to see if residential does make sense for Braintree. And I will bring that forward at a future meeting when you guys are more up to speed on what this requirement is. The other thing I would like to point out is this is not a have to do. There are towns that are saying we're not doing it. It's not a requirement. We currently do not get any of the money that they spend that was tied to this, so we're not losing any funds that way. And I just want people to know that this isn't mandatory. The one thing I will point out is if we change zoning to reflect this, whether someone says this won't be built out, people won't come and build all these houses. If the zoning allows it, it will happen eventually. And I just wanted to add, from a planning board member perspective, my opinion on this. And I will contact you in the future with the cost-effective analysis I did as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I think that information would be very helpful. So thank you. Councillor O'Brien and then Councillor Reynolds.
I just have a brief, so who was that? Do we know the last name?
President Jill Coyle.
Okay, I didn't recognize, I heard Jill, but I didn't recognize. Okay, I'll have something else in a minute, but I'll let Councilor Reynolds go. Thank you.
You know, my mistake. I should ask people to identify themselves, right? When they speak. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. Councilor Reynolds.
So I just want to point out that, you know, it sounds like Ms. Coyle and I are in agreement that this is not a requirement. And I think what she's saying, it's not a requirement for, but to discern the difference between her and I is that this is not a requirement for a community to sign on to it. Because what was followed by that was that if a community doesn't participate in this program, then the community loses out on the opportunity for funding from the state and from the state in a number of different types of programs. And there may be examples where we have not used that particular funding, but I think, you know, a larger comprehensive picture has to be painted here is that we're in a dire situation in this community, the town of Braintree, when it comes to our revenues. And those revenues, and I'm going to point to the Department of Local Services, and this is a fact that you can go on to the site of Department of Revenue. Between the last 10 years ending in fiscal year 2022, the town of Braintree year over year has had a negative economic growth. A negative economic growth. And we have seen our services cut time after time because of that. So again, when I say these types of things, it isn't, I'm not saying that I'm promoting unsustained or uncontrolled growth in our community. It's part of the growth of a community. Braintree started off as a little farm town, and the world changed around us. So for us to live in a cocoon and think that, you know, we're unaffected by the changes of the world, I'm just saying my point of view that it's unrealistic to take that point of view, and we have to have this conversation. We need to have a conversation, and we need to be able to acknowledge what our problems are and listen to one another. I'm willing to listen, and I have been listening, and these are my responses. And I'm sorry if the people who don't agree with my responses or my points of view say that I'm overly aggressive. I'm stating an opinion. I could say the very same for those on the other side of my opinion, that they're overly aggressive. But I'm not going to, because this is a conversation, and I do want the benefit of a conversation to move forward for the benefit of the people of Braintree. So thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to address that.
Sure. Councilor O'Brien.
Before I go, are we going to take the requests or questions from the audience? Because they've had their hands raised. And I'm going to naturally defer to you, Chairwoman.
Oh, okay, those were the two people who spoke.
But then they raised their hands again. And so.
Okay, I thought that was still up there.
I think
So,
you can make that decision, but
Mhm.
if you are, I'm going to defer my comment. But if you aren't, naturally, then I have something else to say.
let me check in with them, if you want to pause for 1 second. So I'll go in order from before. Liz or no, Steve and Liz. Let's see. Steve, you have the floor. Did you re-raise your hand?
I did. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. And then I think Liz did as well.
Okay. Yeah, I just, I think it may behoove this committee to separate some issues, right? There is no doubt about the general need for a plan and for planning for our future. And that includes housing as well as everything else in this town, transit and schools. But we are here talking tonight. The agenda is about the MBTA housing program. And the fact that some people think this particular program is detrimental to Braintree does not mean that we are living in a cocoon or putting our heads in the sand like ostriches. I have read this in great detail, and I think this particular plan would be terrible for Braintree. That doesn't mean that I'm opposed to all plans or any plan. Anybody that's been on the council for any number of years knows that I have communicated these things to the council repeatedly. And if we're going to have a conversation about these things, then I think we need to be very clear in what we're saying, because what we're talking about tonight is a specific agenda item being proposed by the Commonwealth that is very different and far more expansive than any other plan Braintree has considered in the past. And opposition to it is, like I said, not burying our heads in the sand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Liz, did you have another comment?
Hi, yes, I did. Thank you. And I just want to let you know, for the records, I'm on the website mass.gov. And this is their most recent one, multi-zoning requirement for MBTA communities. And if you go to the section, what is the new law? Requirement is coded in section 3A of MGLC 40-A. MBTA communities shall have a zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides for at least one district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right, as I said earlier. And provided, however, that such multifamily housing shall be without age restrictions and shall be suitable for families with children. I'm going to skip over a couple of sections, and I just want to go back down to, it should be located not more than 0.5 miles from a commuter rail station, subway, ferry terminal, or bus station. So if you draw a circle around that station, all I'm saying is you make all of these homes, which were zoned in one particular way, you will be changing the zoning for all these homes, and the possibility exists at some point in time that these entire neighborhoods can be changed dramatically. I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but I think it's only fair to these residents that they be made aware of these risks, because they are real risks and it's in this writing. So please do take the time to read it thoroughly, because that information is all in there. And as the previous speaker, Mr. Sasha, just said, we're all aware that we need housing and that things have to change, and that's all well and fine. But we don't have to have the town as we know it completely upended for this project or proposal. I do not think it will be in line with what most Braintree residents would like. But thank you very much for starting the conversation, and I do hope that you will notify all the people in that area.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Counselor O'Brien.
Thank you. My comments are relative to what a previous speaker mentioned, which is we are solely here to talk about the multifamily zoning requirements for MBTA communities. That said, as the previous speaker just said, there may be some requirements, but then again, there may not be. We don't want to, and I think we did slightly veer off. We don't want to talk about the overall planning because we know there's a process engaged in multiple departments, but mostly in the planning department with the planning board, but then we have the extra committee that's looking at it. So all that is in process. Yes, fine, perfect. But I think when we started this, we did discuss early on, we need the experts to come in because while I appreciate a data gatherer and another attendee who definitely read everything ad infinitum, but it might be moot if the planning director, or more importantly, the one guy who's responsible for all of this, the mayor, says, I have no interest. And that said, we could bicker all night long, which I hate to use that, but that's basically what has just occurred. There's been a little dialogue that has been a little spicy. But then again, the mayor, and as a previous speaker said, isn't a fan of this stuff. Maybe he's already said we're not doing it. And so it's a moot conversation. So that's item one. Item two, relative to the second item, 04222, which is environmental sustainability. Just as an adjunct, because to me, environmental sustainability includes getting rid of plastic bags at supermarkets. My issue has been sitting in a committee for a godforsaken long time with very little forward motion, hung up on whether or not the supermarket reservation desk, whatever they call that, where people go to talk about things, should have a bag that is available for a less than able person, separately from the bags that you're going to force on, not force, because that's a harsh word, but in essence, we are going to better the world by providing a paper bag that can be recycled. That said, another part of this section talks about the air quality. And I know that there are two of us that represent districts that are being hurt by negative air quality. So one of the things that I would like to see happen as an adjunct from this, and again, it's similar to my previous request to have the clerk look into the planning, the development, what is it called? Hold on.
Anything since the,
Yeah, I want to say it right. So give me a second. Housing production plan.
Mhm.
I also don't believe that some of the work that has been performed by non-governmental personnel, and that would be the Four River Community group there, and a professor that they engaged, a PhD that they engaged, was looking at some of the environmental science and some of the items that are affecting our air quality in East Braintree. But I don't believe air quality ever went to our health board. Our health board should be looking at the air quality because the health board is supposed to represent the betterment of the health of the individuals that live in the town of Braintree. So I think that discussion, which much like the first one requires an executive branch expertise, this requires executive branch expertise because we can't tell the health board what to do. But I wonder if the health board has ever looked into some of those air quality studies to decide whether or not what's going on in your patch, Chair Maglio, is in fact affecting the entire town, not just close to the water, if you will, in East Braintree, because I'm in East Braintree too. And then finally, if we're going to kind of roll things forward a little bit quick, as to 04322, one of the focus there is bike lanes. I'm not going to talk specifically about bike lanes, I'm sorry, but I do want to say that the community in general has got to be brought in for those discussions. And I'll tell you why. I live in an area where there was a request in the planning department, one of the agencies of the planning department, to strategize on a bike lane that would literally go from one section in my neighborhood all the way through to the, I'm not going to get it right, but the forest that's over here near the school, and I should know it, but I'm not. But anyway, the issue wasn't necessarily creating the bike lane and making it available to residents of, greater Massachusetts so they could do it. The issue is that some residents in the community, in my specific local community or neighborhood specifically, didn't want to be publicized as a bike lane or a bike avenue, if you will, to get to conservation land, because they didn't want bikes going through their streets. Personally, it caught me off guard when I heard it, completely off guard. But as referenced in multiple conversations here, bringing in the community to talk about these things is important. And so I guess to net out that high level dissertation, I think these are great conversations to have. But I believe that we need the experts, and the experts would then tell you what I just described, because when I talked to the expert, she was actually quite shocked as much as I was that people didn't want bikes going through their neighborhood. And I didn't understand why, because I think it's a great thing, but you got to let the residents speak. And unlike something that occurred in the summer when the residents said they didn't want something and we ended up approving it, it's one of those things that putting your head in the sand doesn't help, but we need to listen to the residents. So I'll stop, and I appreciate what we're doing. And I'm gung ho for a 2-week outbreak, and to get the experts lined up and ready, and then we can go from there. My opinion.
Great. Yeah, that's fantastic. If I could I would love to comment on a couple of things myself. So I think that my overall intention before this meeting, during this meeting, and after this meeting is that we have to figure out like where we're going to start. This is absolutely something that has to be done in concert with the community. It's why it's part of the community planning committee. It's why I want to make sure that there are chat access and speaking access. It's why I posted it on my social media. We have to use the town channels in order to make sure that people know this is available. But I think by the same token, I don't know how to get people more active. I look at the participation in the master plan, and I'm hearing that it may have increased a little bit in some of those meetings, but that overall there hasn't been a huge response. And I don't know how we get that to how we get through that, other than to do the best we can using the strategies that we know will get people present. Now, with that said, oftentimes it's when things are potentially, serious issues that people have a lot of feelings about, or what brings people out. But also our work has to happen before we walk in somewhere. When there's a vote that's about to happen, we need to have been spending the 6 months in advance of that vote, studying, talking, listening. I mean, it's not based on an hour of testimony. It's based on months of research. At least it was for me. And it takes into account all the testimony, and it takes into account the emails and everything else. But I mean, this is where we have to do our homework. And I think this committee is the same thing. We have to do our homework if we're going to be either suggesting or speaking against a major housing production plan. So anyway, I did want to just mention that. And I think this is a perfect beginning point. And if there's anyone else who would, a beginning point, although there are some really critical milestones that we have to make. So if there's anyone else, Councilor Reynolds, if there's anything else you'd like to say, if there's anyone that would like to make public comment, otherwise we probably need to vote to table these issues. Councilor Reynolds.
Okay, so I take it we've opened up the discussion on 04222 and 04322. Is that correct? I just want to make sure that I'm not.
Yes, we've
Jumping
opened
the
both
gun.
up. They're open.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'd agree with you, and I do like the idea of following up with Councilor O'Brien's point on air quality study. Was there anything that ever did go to our health department on that? Was there any actionable or review or any kind of an assessment that was produced? Perhaps, again, pointing out the resources most appropriate to do that in the town of Braintree would be under the executive branch. So I would be very interested to find that out. So is that a takeaway?
I think that's a definite takeaway. I can mention something about that in terms of, we also want to know, are we talking about the health board or the health department? Because those are two different entities, right? One works for the town or town employees. The health board is the Board of Health. And I can say that for the vote that we're talking about this summer, I pulled all of the meeting minutes for the past 5 years to see if during any of the conversations that they had, and I don't want to conflate issues, which I'm kind of starting to do, but I looked to see in all these conversations about cannabis, were there any conversations about air quality, health, residents, etc.? There wasn't a one that was ever documented in the minutes going back to 20. I think I went back 5 years. So just to put that out there.
All right. So that being said, and now my understanding is better, I would suggest that we, as a committee, make a recommendation to the full council for a request for a report from our health department. I'm assuming the health department would engage the health board on this. And I know that we'd probably have to be very specific, Madam Chair, on this, what we're asking for from an assistance standpoint or an informational standpoint, just to ascertain the facts to date. It's a very important issue. On that same issue, and from the air quality standpoint, I guess it's the compressor station itself, and maybe this is grounds for a separate topic for another meeting. I'd be very interested also to understand our public safety posture as it pertains to the risks or potential risks of the compressor station, its operation, and particularly what are the plans in place and what kind of conversations have occurred around evacuation, as well as mitigation assistance to the town of Braintree, where we are, heaven forbid anything were to happen. Similar types of incidents that have occurred in other parts of our country and around the world where these stations have had accidents and explosions. The impact area can be significant in a very densely populated area. So I'd be very interested in that, but that may be another topic of discussion outside of the realm of this particular motion that we're discussing, 042-22.
Right. Well, I think it's very relevant because it's about air quality and safety, and if that's having an impact. But the other thing too that I want to mention about that is that there is going to be on the council agenda on Tuesday night, we're going to get some kind of an update comment about the evacuation plan.
Great.
To date has been head to the high school, and hoping that it's more than that.
Terrific. That is great.
And that was from before the compressor was built. So now that it's actually been built.
Okay.
So.
Terrific. Thank you. If I could still maintain the floor, please. Yes. 043-22. An issue near and dear to my heart is traffic. I shouldn't say near and dear to my heart, but a major concern of mine and a major concern of the constituents of District 2. I'm working on two different issues right now, and actually I could tie in a third for neighborhoods, Hawthorne Road, Adams Street, Commercial Street, as one additional site, and then to an extent, the residents on Cleveland Avenue. I share that district with Councilor O'Brien. The Commercial Street District I share with you, Madam Chair. We have had neighborhood meetings in all three neighborhoods. There is a severe problem we're having with cut through traffic. I think everybody knows that in the town of Braintree. There's major concerns about the lack of proper sidewalks, signalization, traffic calming. And I would like to see this this committee take up as an item of discussion, a definitive discussion on what can we do that makes sense, where we've already been told that the money is not available in our police budget for fielding a traffic enforcement team. What we see is a handoff to the DPW department, and their responsibility is they put up speed bumps. And unfortunately, it seems to be the only kind of mitigation that has been observable. But speed bumps, you either hate them or you love them. There are a lot of different folks who have different opinions on them. But what bothers me the most, and what I think that we need to do is that we can perhaps incite as part of our committee's efforts, is to expose a broader understanding of what it is that we can do as a community to find solutions in lack of the fact that we don't have an ideal traffic enforcement division specifically to help us and to enforce traffic and cut throughs and whatnot. What kind of physical things can we do? What kind of monetary things can we do to get creative? And when we're planning our streets for repaving, for example, Braintree has committed a lot of money every year to the repaving of streets of our infrastructure. It makes sense for us to leverage those efforts also from a public safety standpoint. So what can we do to calm the traffic in these high speed zone areas within our neighborhoods? There are folks who complain quite a bit throughout the district about the speeding through side streets, not just your artery roads or your feeder roads, through residential side streets. I see it all the time, and I don't want us to have an accident or a death be the impetus that actually gets us to try to do something. I think we as a committee can show some initiative, some innovative thinking about what we do to help this problem.
Okay. So are you suggesting that as a continued area of discussion for this group?
Yes, I would like that to be a continued area of discussion.
Great.
I would be happy to provide an outline of ideas, who should be engaged or who could be engaged that would make an effective and meaningful conversation that could actually produce actionable items. Thank
Okay.
you.
Excellent. Thank you, Councilor Reynolds. Councilor O'Brien.
Thank you. I do want to reference one thing. So when I was discussing about what occurred this summer, it was specifically about the vote on marijuana in general. And what I meant was the public came out, in my opinion, in the negative, and they already voted against it. And so that was my commentary about that. It had nothing to do with air quality specifically, but of course, air quality does come part and parcel with the decision. And so we're stuck with the results that we end up with. What I did want to focus on, or what I was specifically talking about, and I guess I should have been clearer, was in fact in the East Braintree area. It has been proven there is in fact information out there in the DEP that we exceed the guideline for just at least one chemical, which is benzene. And so
Yep.
the guideline, or I should say the results, were of concern to me and have been of concern to me for many, many months, in fact, years. But back in 2017, we exceeded the guideline for benzene.
Mhm.
That's the thing that I don't believe the Board of Health ever took action on. So that's specifically, not just benzene, but any of the air quality issues that have occurred or are occurring constantly in the East Braintree area. That's what I think that we need to have addressed. And, you know, I think, again, we need experts. And as to traffic calming, which
You just muted yourself, Counselor.
I did, didn't I? Traffic calming. The mayor has told me there is no more traffic calming. There's no money for it. There's no more traffic calming. We don't have a traffic calming quote unquote engineer. But I think honestly, we need the engineer that we have to even talk about things of this nature. I know there's a community that I brought the mayor to a little over a year now. I don't remember the exact month, but definitely last summer. And there was all kinds of traffic control aspects that were discussed, and bunko occurred. Absolutely zero occurred. I just had a conversation with a resident yesterday, and she's like, when is something going to happen? I don't control that. And that's unfortunate. But I think if we don't have an engineer in that conversation, and by the way, I think at this point, the way we are heading, Madam Chair, and I think, of course, you can make this decision, these kinds of things could be lengthy. And so we may be splitting these up into more than one meeting.
Absolutely.
And not the 2 weeks out and the 1 week. I'm talking about individual categories, if you will, because I think if we bring in residents, which I think is healthy, and I know you do too, because you're allowing it, and you know, I think that's a great thing because it's good, it's healthy for us to listen. I believe that will extend the meeting. Thank you.
For sure. Okay. Well, awesome. I think we have, okay, Councilor Reynolds.
I just want to say thank you to the Councilor O'Brien for adding those particular comments. And I think he touched on something very important, that excuses, we can't handle excuses anymore. We need effort. And that is not, I mean, we need reasons, we need recommended solutions. And to say that we don't have money, that's an excuse. And I'm sorry if it's a political commentary. I don't mean it to be, but it's just as obvious to me that Councilor O'Brien and everyone on this phone call have found themselves in organizations, have found themselves in their own private life where they face problems all the time. And to just throw your hands up and say, "I'm sorry, we don't have any money, can't do any, sorry." That's not good enough. That's our job, is to find solutions.
Exactly.
So thank you, Councilor O'Brien, for your further emphasis.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilor Reynolds. And I would agree. Thank you, Councilor O'Brien. I mean, the whole point is we need a plan. We need a plan for all of these things. And it's not easy. It's not pretty. And it's certainly not fast. But, you know, we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to do our best, and we're going to welcome in anyone who wants to be part of figuring out a plan. We're not starting with any definites. We're not starting with decisions. We're starting with ideas that we will do
Shake out.
that we will shake up. Perfect.
Right.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to suggest that we, if there are no other comments, actually, I do want to make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to comment. And if so, I think that we will table these and we will do a roll call vote for that if there's a motion to table.
There will be, I'm just giving a second to see if anybody raises their hand. Oh, there is a hand raised.
Councilor Reynolds.
Would it make sense for us, or should we be voting, should we make a motion to vote of having the planning director before us, or request the planning director to give us a presentation on the current status of the town's policy as it pertains to the MBTA zoning and transit-oriented development initiatives? MBTA community zoning and transit-oriented development initiatives.
So do I hear a motion?
Yes.
I would defer, I would defer to the Robert's Rules person, but I don't believe that we need to have a formal motion. I think the chair schedules the next meeting and we request the expert through the mayor's office, through our channel, which, so everybody is aware, those that are paying attention, because I do want to, and I think it was mentioned earlier, but I do want to thank the 6 attendees, because generally these get crickets. And so six
Oh, yeah.
of 37,000 is pretty good.
Yes, I would say the same. Thank you for those.
I jest. But no, I don't think we need to have any formal motion. I believe that we just go to the next meeting. But I think that the chair has to seriously consider maybe breaking it into 3. Well, maybe not 3, but maybe 2, depending on. But I think that first one is a beefy discussion and, or not. I mean, we may find out the planning director says, you know what, the mayor said, no, we're not doing it. We're not considering it. Bam, it's over. We go to the next one. But it's something to consider. But I think the chair can manage that, and I'll defer to the Roberts Rules expert who's shaking her head yes down in the corner. At least on my screen, she's in the corner.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so then that's easily something I can do. There was another recommendation to the full council on engaging the health department to find out and ascertain some of the data to date. Is that something that I can also move forward on, or Councilor O'Brien?
Yeah, it wasn't to the full council. It was that just like finding out about the housing production plan,
Okay.
we should also find out if the health board has ever studied the results of the DEP's. Let me see if there's a something specific in here. Well, the only thing he called it was the DEP's perspective on human health risk in the East Braintree area.
The same DEP that approved and then vacated, but allows the permit to
Bingo.
continue operating. Yeah,
Bingo, and we could call it the Four River area, actually, but
yeah,
because I think when the DEP studied it, they're studying it for the Four River. And you know, putting aside the fact that there is a compressor station that we don't want, never wanted, got approved without any real oversight until the feds decided, oh, well, maybe we'll look at it and we'll decide we don't want it. Too late, already there, already capping off all kinds of problems. But let's face it, there's a tank farm over there. Gas, benzene, hello. Anyway, it's been there for years.
Yeah.
There's potential. There's been some cancer issues in the East Braintree area as a result. Nobody studied it. So anyway, I'd like to, that my point was not the council, but just the health.
Okay.
Board. And when I mention anything, it would be the executive branch because they manage the health board through the health department.
the board would be separate though, right?
Well, the
They
health,
serve at the pleasure of the mayor.
yeah.
The board does? Okay,
Right, but they get called to order by the health department, the person that manages the health department who's in the building inspection department.
okay.
All right, so that said, I think we've pretty much beat that horse down and I don't see any hand raised. It's not my issue to look at hands raised. I'm sorry for I'll defer to you on that. However, Madam Chair, I will make a motion to table items 04122, 04222, and 04322 to a future meeting.
I second that.
Excellent. Roll call vote, please. Clerk Semino?
Councilor Maglio,
Aye.
Councilor O'Brien,
Aye.
Councilor Reynolds.
Aye.
That's 3 in favor, 0 opposed.
Excellent.
Motion to adjourn.
And
Second.
Oh, he beat you. I think we're okay.
okay, is there I
think-
think I heard a motion to adjourn and it was seconded.
You did, and I'm going to just discuss it. I think follow-ups are okay. If we ask the clerk to follow through on housing production plan and whether the health board has ever done any health study of East Braintree hazardous chemicals via the DEP's analysis as at a minimum. And then, Madam Chair, you could take the rest from there. I think, although I don't want to tell you what to do. Just from the planning of the next meeting is what I mean.
Sounds good. Yes.
Got it.
So, and then I will come up with a date. We can email about the date, right? Or do we want to pick one right now?
I'd be okay with emailing only, and it's only my opinion, only because we got to find out about the experts if they're available.
Right. Okay. All right. Very good. So then I think, I'm going to ask if there's a motion to adjourn.
There was already. So we
There
just,
was already, and it was seconded. So
Second.
now we just
Oh, we need
need
the
a-
roll
Roll
call.
call. All right, roll call, Councilor Maglio,
Aye.
Councilor O'Brien,
aye.
and Councilor Reynolds.
Aye.
That is unanimous.
Fantastic. This
Meeting
meeting
is
is
adjourned.
adjourned. Thank you,
job, Jim.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.